Sangharia English speaker. His research is centred on the recognition and revival of Indigenous languages. In 2020, he launched an innovative language program, Mwebangi, or Flying Breath, that brings together community language learners for shared language exploration, discussion and practice. He has been instrumental in helping build relationships between communities and government, and has been called on to offer his advice on language policy and legislation. As a respected language researcher, speaker, performer and knowledge holder, Ray is known for centering an Indigenous strengths-based approach in his ongoing contribution to Indigenous language ecologies. Ray holds a doctorate of philosophy and also a doctorate of letters, both at the University of Newcastle. Ray is currently serving as a council member and chairperson for the New South Wales Aboriginal Land Council.
Thank you. Can I first begin by acknowledging the elders of the Woombangi, a couple of really old people in the room today. Old brothers, sisters, thank you very much. It is important that I do recognise those elders, in particular, as we travelled down from Armidale. We do the same circle every year. We come down the back way into this country. This is the Macleay River. We spend a couple of days moving from Bellbrook onto Kempsey. We would then make our way to sometimes to the back beach at Crescent Head. We'd spend a couple of days over with the family, Davis family, on, it wasn't Bellwood then, it was where they first had a house over in another part of Nambucca. And occasionally we'd pull up at Urunga at the Kellys. We would sometimes make our way through the Grindy Beach, and occasionally would even pull up at the Briggses at Grafton. This was a regular, ongoing thing that my father had, particularly for us kids in that period. We were, and he was probably the first tour guide, at least the first tour guide that I knew. With the greatest respect, I want to thank Bingai Raymond and Nail for this innovative and creative way of bringing people together into a space where we can all share, we can all learn, we can cry, and we can laugh. It's important as we begin to start to think about our history that we give credence and respect to those who walked before us. And to the last speaker, can I just say that it's an exceptional presentation today. It's very articulate. It speaks about the family. It has an emotion, and I was just really chuffed to fancy you saying you was nervous. Now I got to follow you. The name of this paper is, or the name of this piece is In Search of the thurru and the Staging of the Successful Bara. In the early 1900s, on Bellbrook Mission, a bara was established, and a group of Woombangi, Dungati, and a smattering of people from the Biripi in the Gloucester area came together to stage a bara. I imagine that their need for this gathering was to hold on to old values, to restore law and order, and to pass on the responsibility of caring for country and for leadership in community. This image is Raymond Kelly, my father, and a newly arrived anthropologist called Harry Cream. He was called, look, I'm calling him Harry now. That's what he wants to be known as. He arrived in the country and they set about establishing the New South Wales Aboriginal Sites of Survey team. At some point it was called the Sacred Sites Survey team. Very quickly in the establishment of that group, the old people said, we don't want that word sacred. We want that word, it's important, but it's, because if we say it's sacred, nobody ever goes there. Nobody ever revisits those places. So they changed that name from sacred sites to sites of significance. Very early in the piece. My father went to school at Belgrade to the age of 3rd class. I don't know what that made him. 3rd class, he was out of school at a very early age, and was a manual labourer. You can see by that photo he was probably very good at labouring at that time. But he had by chance gotten this in to meet a number of people, and one of the people that he had met was a guy called, who's not going to be presented in this place, was a gentleman named Ned Eiston. And in Armidale they were having a series of conversations, not unlike this, in the community, where people would gather and communicate about the things that were affecting their communities and the way in which they might work out how to get plans and develop ways to move forward. It was also about this time that my dad had his first job at the university, and so as a 13-year-old kid I began to start to hear these catch cries of the time, you know, like transaction analysis, son, that's what it's about. Sitting down and thrashing it out together. And I would often think about what he was trying to tell us, what he was trying to demonstrate to us at that time. Of course, you're a 13-year-old, what do you want to know? You don't want to know anything about politics. So he wrote a paper to the Australian Archaeology Society, I think in 1974-75. Now the weird thing about this is that he actually had me read the paper at home, as if because I'd gone on to school longer than he thought maybe I could give him some pointers. Well, as it turned out, it needed no changes, and certainly I wouldn't have had the insight nor the foresight that he had at that time to talk about the way in which he saw the situation for our people. So here they are on this occasion at the site of that ceremony site at Belgrade, near Belgrade Mission. By this stage, the hangover, the anxiety, the fear around talking about traditional society, and certainly things like initiations and ceremonies was no longer in the taboo bucket, and people began to start to talk about it. Obviously there were more non-Aboriginal people on that side at that stage, but here we are. So out of that paper came this image that he had, he began to start to talk about. It was the way in which all of the information was being assumed and taken up into the university and not being given back to the Aboriginal people, either that by a grapevine which would slip out. So what he was suggesting then is that there needed to be this new highway of language, of communication, of information coming directly out of the universities. And I think that in some ways is happening right now. And that leadership is important. And so take my hat off to the Gingana Freedom School, but we need to have more of that. We need to have not just prep schools, we need to have high schools, and we need universities. And they must be Indigenous led, and they must be First People led. So that's my vision for the future. So the research castle won't look like that by the time we get to it. It'll just be a big open space where everybody can come in and out of any time they want. So as I said, this is some of the work that he had done earlier on. And these were some of the people that he had begun to communicate with. Certainly in the top right, Uncle Victor Shepherd, Mr. Smith, Les Smith I think it is, and John Quinlan. And John Quinlan will become a little bit important later on in my story, but I haven't got an image to take you to, so I'm going to have to use a bit of storytelling to get you to it in the end. On the right hand side, and here are a number of the sites that he had personally been involved in protecting during that period of time that he was involved with the National Parks and Wildlife Service. But certainly the two mentors that he held close to were in the bottom portion of that image. Uncle Ben De Silva, who many of you would remember, and Frank Archibald, who was my great-grandfather. The first site that he had ever recorded, and was on the state protection, is the place Birul Balai. Birul Balai, and Dutton translates as that there is my mountain. But it's a story that is in some ways tied up with that initiation story. It is about the time a man broke away from darkness. Now, we don't altogether have the story around that. But one of the things that, I'll just sidestep for digress for a few minutes. When they brought that gathering together at the foot of this mountain, there were over 60 odd people, 60 odd men waiting for this procession, for this ceremony, for this gathering to occur. And they were waiting on one of the last senior lawmen, one of the last grunders. And the story goes that he couldn't make it. So they waited 2 or 3 days and decided that they should progress. And then they said, so how are we to do it? Who's going to lead it? And as the custom was in that space, there was no names, nobody could communicate, you couldn't call somebody out and ask somebody to do it. So the idea that somebody became an important call. Somebody can do it. You know, somebody heard somebody singing a couple of them songs. I think somebody might be able to do that. And that person said, if somebody gives somebody a hand, somebody thinks he can do it. And so this is how that ceremony progressed. The fact that a number of people had agreed that they could do it if they worked hard together, if they managed to pull it together, they could couple it together, they could do it. To some degree, I see that as the river's turn. We are here together trying to work out how to get to our stories, how to get to an end, and so it's about sharing those bits and pieces that we know. And so we often see this as the centre of our universe, our cultural universe, but of course this is just one story. There are literally hundreds of thousands of stories that exist in this country. And what we've been communicating and realising with each other is that we have these magnificent stories that travel across vast distances, across boundaries and borders that either did exist or didn't exist, but they just travelled. I'm reminded of one of the tapes from a senior man of the Gumbangi, Tiger Buchanan, who was speaking to a linguist crowd. He said, you know, one time ago, a black man walked right through the mountain. And so when I think about this position that a black man could walk right through the mountain, indicates to me that there was a time when freedom was clearly known to us. Perhaps it was a time when people travelled and gathered together in vast areas. I simply coupled this my way in my thesis, and it was the way in which I believe that we all operate, that we drag this information together. Every day I think we live in two camps, and we manage to do that. I hear of code switching, I hear of creoling, and I think that we do that every day. When we leave our doors to working with colleagues, we find a new way to communicate in the open space, but we always are able to change and adapt when we come back home and we talk our own way. This is a thing that my father was talking about in the 70s, was this idea of the renaissance of our culture, the renaissance. And, so revaluing, revitalising and renewal is not altogether different from what he wanted. I wanted to just quickly show you this story. Many of you who were here for the ceremony got to see some of this imagery on its feet. Can I just say how great that smoke out the front of the Indian was? Do you mind if I borrow that? I'm always happy to tell you that. I saw the Gumbayngi mob up in Coffs Harbour do this, and so we're always going to have that from now on. That's going to have to smoke. It came from a story that we had as children in Armidale on the Mish. And so here's an image of Frank Archibald, who was my great-grandfather, and his grandfather, Robert, or King Robert, or Malawangi. So we as kids would sit, and I would watch two grandfathers. Len de Silva became my grandfather when he married my grandmother Ethel Mackenzie Archibald, and so I only ever knew him as grandfather. So I just say grandmother and grandfather, but it should have been old grandfather. And so they would sit somewhere away from us with the fire. But the one thing that I always heard as a kid, we could make out certain words that were easy, beway, things like that. We could always understand those things. Well, what captured my imagination was the flutters. And it's the trill use, the use of the trill. There were devoiced trills that just was a flutter, and sometimes they would rise into a pitch and become other sounds, which I've now realised that linguists have written down in certain ways. So, ori is still ori, but it needs to stop, and so that capture the throat, more often than not, by a linguist will be written as a K. And so that's the thing that I remember watching those old people, because I was just mesmerised by the chatter going back and forth. But it was as if I could imagine a talk in between, what it was doing here. And so, the other thing that I recollect is that they never stopped talking. They just, a bit like you and Berrigan did 5 minutes ago. And so I was always mesmerised by that talk. The other thing I also recognised, because that was Gumbayngi and Dangati, and my grandfather and my dad were and I realised that the tempo was different. Gumbayngi speakers were faster speakers. Don't think there was any difference in terms of quality or content. I just thought that they had there was a difference, dialectic difference, or whatever you want to call it. Anyway, Malawangi is a story in itself that was found when I was able to pull it apart. This is an image, so that 1983, when the train arrived, this is an image taken by his grandfather, Frank's grandfather, of his grandmother and his great-grandfather, of his grandmother and grandfather, standing on the arch in the main street of Armidale. And so Frank recollects that story. I'm not going to see if that train, if that'll work. If it does, I'd have to put this in. But what we're able to do is to find, I'm not sure if this will work, so I'll try. See if I can be smart.
Field tape 16, item 19. John Gordon on the 26th of August, speaking to Mr. Frank Archibald in East Armidale. Mr. Archibald is 84 and has lived in the area all his life. He sings 2 songs in Kumlinga. The first was written by his grandfather to commemorate the arrival of the first train in Armidale. The second concerns the Salvation Army. Reminiscences continue onto the next tape, number 17. Well, Mr. Archibald, I believe you need to sing us a railway song. When was the occasion?
Opening of the railway down to town.
Yes. And how long ago was this?
I suppose when the first train came to Armidale, you know, first one 100 years ago, I suppose.
So the song will therefore be about 100 years old.
Yeah.
And you've lived in this area most of your life?
Yeah, born here.
And that'd be about
84 years.
84 years ago. This is a real historical song. Thanks.
That's it, kind of a short song, but then the bell is that's in the water on the bell let the train go through, you see.
Very good.
And the wheel, one is the wheel going around the train.
Yes. Yeah.
And one lead.
So there are a couple of things that can happen. And so for the last 25 years maybe, I've been listening to these tapes, sometimes up to 8 hours a day. And it's not like I'm listening to a lot of tapes, I'm listening to the same tapes more often than not. At intervals I've gone back and reassessed what I've actually learned and thought I heard earlier, and I've changed my mind altogether numbers of times. And the thing that comes is, I think that's because I've taken the time to listen, and things have started to work internally, and I've come up with different ways of looking at that language. So much so that this is my bit on it right now, and so I think if we just look at what I've got written as number 5 there, Bel del Vero Virgilero. So what I assume is happening there is there's a shift in language, but the reality is we can't always get at it straight away. We've got to get at it through the way that we do. The challenge for me though is when I'm working with linguists who tell me that it's this and that it can't be any other way, I said, well look, I've been doing it for 25 years and I can tell you I've changed my mind a dozen times over what I think I've heard. And so I think sometimes people get stuck. The big challenge though is working with gurus. Because as far as they're concerned, I got my book, I got the diary. I got the diary. Not a diary. So, you know, the big challenge is about working with people. So we've got Birgen Neff, he's in a gig now, working for the AECG. We've got Murabai. I'm going to come back up, I'm going to have another go in Dangati Baria and see if we can sit down and work out a pathway forward. There is just so much material to dig through. We need more young academics in the space, and you don't think that you lose your soul when you go into these spaces. You don't have to give away anything. But we need young people in the space. I'm not going to take any more time. Thanks very much. I will say this though, we're going to have to go. My son, our son is graduating this afternoon, and we have to be away. And of course, one more time, Bingai Neoed, thank you, brother, for putting this together.
Questions?
Oh,
I should have offered last time. I saw you at the last conference, but I would be happy to help however I can.
yes.
I know I live in America, but however, I'm willing to help out.
You need to change that to Turtle Island, you know.
We could, we're absolutely happy to have a chat. And the thing for me, Shay, as we move forward, and it's really about, you know, this thing of inquiry and working with the tools of a linguist, the IPA and all of those. You know, I've just been so impressed with that skill, and it is not just a skill, there's a toolbox there that can be useful to our people. What we've got to do is get over the fear of working in a space where we're uncomfortable, where we think we don't know, because we can soon learn, but we can also work with good people who are willing to share the load.